I'm going to be continuing my teaching from last time, which was free yourself so you can be yourself, or vice versa, be yourself so you can free yourself. And I'm going to kind of build on what Bill was talking about judgment last week, and I'm going to touch on that a bit. But I'm going to begin by just talking about a little bit about personal growth and spiritual growth. This is kind of things that I repeat every time I teach. And my goal is to have people come into a knowledge of who and what they truly are as spiritual beings, and the freedom that comes along with that. Freedom being a manifestation of the highest levels of consciousness. Dependency is being a manifestation of lowest levels of consciousness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about spiritual growth and personal growth, and then I'm going to move on to the meat of the lesson. So personal growth is removing the barriers to spiritual growth, usually emotional barriers. But oftentimes they are tied to our identity, which I talked a lot about last time I taught. And I'm using two computers here, so if I seem a little distracted, it's because my notes are on my other computer sitting next to me. So personal growth is removing the barriers, generally emotional barriers, but sometimes it's knowledge and identity and culture. And there's some tools we can use to work through those barriers, and I'll talk a little bit about those. And spiritual growth is always growth, or my experience of spiritual growth is always growth from a small, self-centered, self-conscious mentality to a more expansive, inclusive, unified consciousness. And so that's the progression we want to participate in and continue with throughout life. It is growth from a self-centered, self-conscious mentality to the oneness of the all. So, so personal growth, I listened to something recently that really, somebody was asking about how to measure our spiritual growth, because we're always wanting measurements and things that we can compare ourselves to. And the teacher talked about how there really is no spiritual growth, and I really get this, because I'm not going to become more infinite. There is no person that's more spiritual than another person, because we are spirit. That actually is our nature, and we are perfectly created infinite spirits. And I'm never going to be more infinite than you. That's just the fact. But there are things that kind of move us towards within our own consciousness, within human consciousness. Spiritual consciousness doesn't change, but human consciousness does. And the spirit and the growth that we experience is really the expansion of our human consciousness into what you could call a perfected state of unity. I once read that the purpose of life is to perfect human consciousness. And there is something to that. Human consciousness is constantly changing. Every time, if you close your eyes, you're in one state of consciousness, and if you open your eyes, you're in a different state of consciousness. That is true with all of our emotional states. That is true as we learn things. It's true as we connect with other people. One way to expand our consciousness, and like I said, growth is always expansion. I really kind of love the line that Keel Gibran used when he was talking in The Prophet about, spiritual growth is not growth like a blade of grass growing upward. It's more like a lotus blossom opening. So spiritual growth is always expansion. And and I actually could make a case that all knowledge, all learning is always expansion, because it always makes our world a little bit bigger, to understand more and more and more things. Yeah, something I didn't get when I was young, it was all about being right, and unfortunately, if I'm right, then I'm stuck right there in that spot, and I'm not going to move. Once I know something, that's the only thing I can see. So let's talk a little bit about spiritual growth and removing the barriers, because that's the part that we tend to find ourselves in most of the time, is in personal growth. And it's probably the most difficult and painful. I've read that pain is the touchstone of all spiritual growth, and I disagree with that. It's the removing of the barriers to spiritual growth that is painful, because we have to let go of these emotional connections in order to expand. And that we often experience that as loss, even though most of the time we're gaining, incredible amounts of stuff, or amounts of consciousness. And there really is no loss, because we carry all that time and experience with us. So nothing is really ever lost. So in spiritual growth, it's the things that hold us back. Sometimes it is our identity. We identify ourselves as human beings. We often identify ourselves with our bodies. I am Jeff McIntyre, but Jeff McIntyre is not what I am. Jeff McIntyre is what I'm doing at this particular moment. I was spirit before I entered this body. I'm spirit now, and I'll be spirit after I leave this body. That is what I am. Jeff McIntyre and all the connections and identities that I've created in this lifetime are not what I am. They are what I'm doing. And one of our biggest mistakes as human beings is that we identify ourselves with what we do. What you do is what you are, is what we say. But it's not true. We can change what we do anytime we want, if we want it enough. But change is difficult. And there are stages of loss and grieving that you have to go through when you make changes. So in order to grow, we need to remove the emotional barriers that keep us from expanding. Now there are tools we have for this kind of growth, and probably the biggest tool is just basic honesty. Not something you hear a lot about in spiritual talks, but the honesty I'm talking about is being honest with yourself about yourself. It often is very beneficial to have a trusted friend or counselor or teacher to be able to share your most difficult things with, so you can get an objective feedback. There's also a freedom that comes, I guess it's the value of confession. I was raised a Catholic, and we have confession in Catholicism. And there really is a relief that comes when we take a secret and share it with another. Obviously, if you're going to do that, you should do that with a very trusted person who can be trusted not to share your secret with everyone else. Because that actually, having that experience, which I've had that experience actually, and having the experience of that trust be betrayed can often shut us right back down again, and even maybe more securely than we were before. In my case, it was in an environment that it didn't really make that much difference, and over time I saw that it really didn't do me any harm, and I was able to move on and expand. But personal honesty is really, really important, and I'm going to get into why it's so important here shortly. So removing the barriers, okay, so first thing we need to do is just get honest, that we need to empower ourselves by taking responsibility for our life. And part of that responsibility is being honest about our life. And like becoming honest and continuing to be honest, and not make up stories and try to make ourselves look good or start to make ourselves look right. Like I said, I really see looking back on my ill-gotten youth that wanting to be right really held me back from a lot of growth. And mainly because I actually, I talked about identity last time I spoke. And identity, and I'll give you my definition of identity. Identity is a story that we make up about ourselves, and then we attach ourselves to it. In other words, it comes to own us. I'm an engineer, I'm a sailor, I'm a pilot, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a thief, I'm a liar, I'm a mystic, I'm a teacher. Those are all identities. And if we are attached to that identity, it will hold us in place, just like any other emotional anchor. So the other thing, other tools we use to overcome the barriers to spiritual growth, once we become honest, we often realize that we have hurt other people, and we need to go back and contact those other people and make amends to them. It's probably one of the most difficult things and part of the process to actually, as a matter of fact, the idea of actually facing a person who I had harmed was absolutely terrifying to me. But the freedom from guilt and shame that you get from doing that is just incredible. And like I said, freedom is a manifestation of the highest levels of consciousness. So I highly recommend following that path. We also use prayer, meditation, study, and for most of us, it's very important. I've always needed a fellowship. People that I know, people that I connect with, that I can be part of, that I can be part of something greater than myself. And, it kind of grew that way. It went from 2 people to groups of people to communities, to eventually you see yourself as part of the whole, and that whole keeps getting bigger no matter how expansive I think I've gotten. There's always more. So that's all I'm going to touch on for personal growth this time. I'm probably going to do, next time I teach, I'll actually get into a system of spiritual growth that can be used step by step by step. Because today I want to talk a little bit more about spiritual growth, and spiritual growth being that expansive, continuing expansive discovery process. And the goal here is to discover who and what we truly are. And so, like I said, we always are looking, us human beings are always looking for a measure of our spiritual growth. And so I'm going to kind of give you one, even though there really is no measure of spiritual growth, because spirit is what we are, and spirit is infinite and can't be measured. But and I'll tell you, one barrier to spiritual growth I had was, this person is spiritual because he's way up here, and this person's not spiritual because he's way down there, and that kind of judgment. And this is, I guess this is a good segue to talk about what Bill talked about judgment last week. And I'm not going to try to revisit the things he talked about, but I was, we think about judgment, and most people that are on a spiritual path think of judgment, I wouldn't say as bad, but as, let me just ask this question: what's the problem with judgment? Okay. I mean, the reality is that we make judgments all day long, and every time we decide to drive the car rather than walk, or on and on. I mean, I could give a zillion examples. I scratch my head with my right hand rather than my left hand. That's a judgment. Chocolate versus vanilla. That's a judgment. So we make judgments all the time. Although that's really not the kind of judgments we're talking about. But what is the problem with judging other people and judging, everything from philosophies to institutions? What's the problem with judgment? And here's what I think the fundamental problem with judgment is. And of course, Jesus gave us guidance about judgment. He said, judge not. But anyway, the problem with judgment is that it separates us. It separates us from whatever we're judging. For me to judge something, it has to be out there somewhere. Okay? For me to judge a person, they have to be different than me. I judge them to be different than me. Which, of course, spiritual growth is always growth towards unity. The mystical experience, and I don't care what cultural or religious context you put it in, the mystical experience is always an experience of oneness and unity. I've never seen an exception to that. My experience of judgment, at least my exercise of judgment, let me put it that way, is that it separates me from the other person. And usually it puts me in a self-righteous place and them in a wrong place. That's generally the nature of my judgment. It's kind of funny looking back on it. And the reality is that when I'm most out of sorts and I'm most self-centered, and self-righteousness is a pretty self-centered place. There's a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt that he actually says that the default position for human beings is self-righteousness. We always think we're right, which is kind of hilarious. So the problem of judgment is that it separates us, and it puts us into a state of mind that we're either above or below. I very often, my unworthiness, my perceived unworthiness, and it was unworthiness because I'd done a lot of ridiculous things. I'm a drug addict and alcoholic, and I did lots of things I would never have done sober. So my perceived judgment of myself is that I belong below some rock somewhere, which was, of course, incorrect. I was just as much a perfectly created spiritual being then as I am now. So my judgment was flawed, and all human judgment is flawed because human perspective is tiny. That is just simply the nature of human consciousness, is that we have a limited perspective unless we are in a state of spiritual consciousness and unity with our spiritual mind. The interesting thing that happens when we are in a state of unity is that we don't judge. We see ourselves as all one. And that should tell you something. It's when I'm most self-centered and most flawed, you might say, that I'm most judgmental. So let's talk about a measure of our spiritual growth. So I'm going to talk about little different states of mind. Okay, so my way of looking at this is how available am I making myself to life? How available am I making myself to people, to everything? What different states of mind make me more or less available to be conscious of and participating in life? And if I'm sad, does that make me more available for life or less available for life? If I'm angry, does that make me more available or less available? If I'm self-righteous, does that make me more available or less available? And I will touch on, because I've been talking a lot about what we reap what we sow. I have to understand that my anger is no better than anybody else's anger. And my self-righteousness is no better than anybody else's self-righteousness. Because those kind of judgments where I think that my righteous perception of myself makes me better than other people. I often use Donald Trump as an example of that stuff, but because we like to point the finger at him. But so does hunger make us more or less available to life? Does fear make us more or less available to life? Okay. Does peace of mind make us more or less available to life? Does joy make us more or less available to life? Does love, that attribute of our mind that wants to unify, does that make us more or less available to life, to the consciousness and participation in life? You know, it's pretty easy to see that when I'm at peace, I am more receptive to life. Okay, when I'm angry, I'm pushing it away, and I'm pushing you away. I might even be doing worse things than that. You know, sadness, remorse, guilt, shame, you know, those things are all things that close us down into that self-centered, selfish mentality, which makes us less available for life. So we can measure where we are in consciousness at this very moment, simply by looking at our emotional state, looking at the state of consciousness, whether we're sitting in judgment of other people, if we're sitting in judgments of ourselves, okay? Being present in the moment, very important. You know, a lot of our stories disappear, you know, that identity I was talking about before, where we make up a story, and we do that to other people. By the way, we assign other people identities also. We make up a story about them and then attach it to them. You know, when we move closer and closer and closer to living in the now, okay? In other words, not making up stories about the future, not trying to rewrite the past or re-experience the past, actually experiencing life right now. Being in the now is one of those things that makes us available to life. Okay? If you are living in the moment, there is no remorse. There is no need for patience. There's no, you know, a lot of the anxiety and fears in life disappear because anxiety and fears come from thinking about the future. And if you're not doing that, they disappear. So hunger, fear, judgment, identity, culture. Okay, let's talk a little bit about culture. And we take our cultures very personally, very, very personally. I think one of the most wonderful things that's happened in my life is that I've traveled all over the world. And I've been on every continent except Antarctica. I can't even tell you how many countries I've been to. And the one thing I've learned is that people are always more the same than they are different. Sometimes we have to look past appearances, but cultural appearances, physical appearances, wealth and poverty. But it's really astounding as you get to know people, even in very different situations, they are alike. They are actually in unity as being human beings on planet Earth, and that was a wonderful lesson for me, because a lot of the judgment we do, especially we live in although we live in an incredibly affluent society, we also live in a very materialistic society where appearances, it's probably not as big a deal in the United States as it is in Europe, where they have kind of a class system, but it's still pretty important here, where we look at what people have and we judge them. We look at what we have and we judge ourselves. We look at appearances and clothes and hair styles and beards, and whatever, we look at people and we judge them. And, one of the things that traveling all over the world, one of the valuable skills, I guess you would call it, is the ability to look past that and see the human being within whatever context you're in. So actually, context is one of those limiting experiences or whatever. Okay, so I'm already using up all my time. I probably won't complete this because it's never enough time for me talking. So let me just look at my thing because I want to. Okay, I'm going to read you something that occurred to me a couple of weeks ago. It says, each of us must decide whether we will walk in the light of creation or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. Each of us must decide whether we will walk in the light of creation or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. And something I want to something I want to make sure I hit on is there have been times when I walked in that destructive selfishness, and I was not just destructive to myself; I was destructive to the people around me. And there are times when I walk in the light of creation, and really unity. We are creative beings by nature, and of course, nothing that we learn is going to change our nature. Okay. We will always, always, always create. So if we are in chaos, we will create chaos. If we are in truth and light and peace and love, that is what we will create. The creative process never stops. We are creative beings by nature. And that is simply what will always happen. If we're in the chaos of the self-centered quest for instant gratification, we will create chaos in our lives and the lives of everyone around us in seeking that instant gratification, that selfish gratification. And my life at one time was really moving from one gratification to the next, to the next, to the next. My generation was sex and drugs and rock and roll. That was basically us. If we dwell in the peace of the collective consciousness of our true nature, we will create unity and serenity everywhere that we go. I'm going to read that again. Okay. If we dwell in the peace of the collective consciousness of our true nature, we will create unity and serenity everywhere we go. And that is the discovery of who and what we are. We are the collective consciousness. That is our nature. It is a spiritual nature. It is a creative nature. Right? But we do get to choose. We get to choose running after that selfish stuff, or we get to choose running after unity. Or being in unity, actually, is what it really is. Because usually if we're in unity, we're being, not running, not seeking. I was once a spiritual seeker. I'm no longer a spiritual seeker. I dwell in the consciousness of spirit. And my big challenge for today, and the big challenge I will give all of you, is to find a way to express that spiritual nature in the human realm. And that's all I have for today. So God bless you all, and to all good night.